When you're about to bench press for strength, you want each rep to feel as easy as possible. When a powerlifter does a set of 5 with a new PR weight and he racks the weight and he goes, that was easiest. His buddies are like, yes, that's success. But imagine in hypertrophy training, finishing a PR of leg press, racking the weight and be like, that was easiest. Your buddies are going to be like, cool. Why did you leave the machine? This is what you want to say to your hypertrophy training buddies is to finish that set of leg press and be like, dude, my quads are cooked. That's winning at hypertrophy training. So if you want to train for both at the same time, you might have to make some choices one way or the other that don't optimize one or the other thing. Hey folks, Dr. Mike here for RP Strength. There is a technique difference between size and strength training that most people miss. Not because they're bad people, although many of them are actually bad people for no related reason. It's because folks get the two size and strength training very mixed up. And that's usually okay because they're both amazing. However, one little change in mentality and approach, especially as you get bigger and stronger and more advanced, can be a big deal for maximizing your muscle growth, and in the other direction, a big deal for maximizing your strength gainability. Let's take a look, starting from the commonalities between size and strength training, which I want to emphasize are massive. The cross-sectional area of your muscle, if we cut your bicep, this is terrible, down the middle, and scope into it and see how thick it is, that is the single biggest determining factor for size. It's the only factor for size, and it's the biggest determining factor for strength. If you have a bigger muscle, it is going to be stronger, period. And muscle size in an absolute sense is like a car engine. Not all V8s produce faster cars than V6s, but on average, the engine size is going to be the biggest determining factor. So cross-sectional area, muscle size is a big deal. But in strength training, other factors come into play. The degree of brain and spinal and peripheral nervous system activity can help you become much stronger, even though it doesn't really affect your size a ton. That's how come powerlifters are often similarly sized or even smaller than bodybuilders, but they can lift more because their nervous systems are there to give you as much possible strength from that same amount of size as you can. And there are also architectural factors. It turns out that if you practice similar or the same lifts for a long time, weeks and weeks and months, your muscle fibers actually turn a little bit into the direction of force produced by that lift, which is why weightlifters who do lots of high bar squats are really good at high bar squatting because their nervous systems are really well trained for it and because their muscle architecture shifts in a direction that optimizes their high bar squat. If you're a bodybuilder and you're doing leg presses, you're doing leg extensions, you're doing hack squats, you're going to be really, really big and generally good at high bar squats, but that last 5, 10, 15% of strength is due to architectural and nervous system factors. And a 15% difference in strength is like you're a very good powerlifter compared to you're the best powerlifter in the world. So nervous system and architectural factors add into strength training in a way they don't really add into size training. However, there are lots of other commonalities, and one of the biggest ones is both require you to train multiple times a week for the same muscle or movement, and both require you to go hard. Or, as Jeff Nippard likes to say, hard. Jeff, I love you, but it just so happens that you're from Eastern Canada, and I don't want to say you people talk funny, and you're great because of it. Now in Michigan, we don't have an accent. Oh, we do, don't we, Scott?
Yes, Midwest trash.
Pello
accent.
Instead of pillow, rough instead of roof, and we don't drink milk here, we drink oftentimes milk. But Scott, do you know the only people I've ever heard say milk are Midwestern girls with bull rings. And so they can say whatever they want because they are God's angelic children.
Yeah, that's true. That's hot.
Super hot. There are differences in training approach between size and strength. So there's lots of commonalities. There are some differences in what we're trying to train, but the approach is going to be a bit different. Here are some really core differences in training that's not getting to the big difference in mentality and in technique. Exercise selection. When we're training our glutes for hypertrophy, we really want to target the glutes. So we ask the question of which exercise really targets the glutes. We don't really care about how much weight is on the bar necessarily or what exercise is used in competition because there is no competition in hypertrophy training. It's just the outcome we want. So like a front foot elevated Smith machine lunge is an amazing glute exercise. But in powerlifting, for example, and training for strength, we want to train for specific movements because that's how we test them. So deadlifts are an excellent Movement that also stimulates plenty of glute hypertrophy, good God, plenty of glute hypertrophy, but maybe not optimally. However, it does make you really, really good at deadlifts. That doesn't mean you can't do front foot elevated lunges for hypertrophy work for powerlifting. It doesn't mean you can't do deadlifts for hypertrophy, but at some point you might have to make a choice on the margins, and targeting specific muscles is the goal of hypertrophy. Targeting specific movements is the goal of strength. You want bigger shoulders for hypertrophy. You want a big overhead press for strength, and things like that. The second difference is in repetition range. The best way to get directly stronger is to train between sets of 3 and sets of 6 repetitions, roughly, somewhere in that range, plus or minus. Sets of 3 to 6 are amazing basic strength builders. And if you want to build muscle size that converts very well to be amenable to be made stronger, then sets of 5 to 10 are probably the best hypertrophy range for strength application. Like if you're a powerlifter and you need bigger legs because you want to squat more, building your big legs with sets of 5 to 10 is going to convert to bigger numbers on your squat than building your bigger legs with sets of 10 to 15 reps, for example. So 3 to 6 and 5 to 10 for strength, and then the kind of hypertrophy that maps really well onto strength. However, for pure hypertrophy, anywhere between sets of 5 and sets of 30 reps close to failure is really good for hypertrophy, and the distinctions within those ranges are very nuanced and very situation specific. So there's a much broader range of hypertrophy training reps, and they don't tend to be as low as strength training reps. So if you want to train for both at the same time, you might have to make some choices one way or the other that don't optimize one or the other thing. And lastly, a big programming difference between hypertrophy and strength training is going to be volume. Strength training benefits from a lower fatigue environment, and its amount of systemic fatigue that it causes because lifting heavy is a special kind of up to your nervous system and other things. You're going to accumulate more systemic fatigue doing it, so you can't do as many sets. You don't need as many sets, and you can't do as many sets. So anywhere between 5 to 15 sets per muscle group and or movement per week seems to be optimized for strength training for most people. So if you do a sum total of 8 sets of some kind of squat per week, you're well in that range. For hypertrophy training, it's really more like 10 to 30, especially more like 20 to 30 in specialized programs. So if your chest just isn't growing and you've been doing sets of 8 for the chest, sets of 8 sets per week for chest, it's a great way to get your chest strong for sure. But to get it the maximum size, you're going to want to flirt over 10 and then considerably over 10, especially if you ease in. A more simple way to say this is in most cases, strength training is going to require considerably less volume than hypertrophy training, sometimes by as little as half of the volume. Hypertrophy training may require double the number of work sets that optimizes it versus strength training. So if you're training for both, again, you might have to make some trade-offs and say, what am I really training for in the next mesocycle or two? I'm going to lean in to more high volumes, higher reps, and so on and so forth, and maybe movements that are more targeted to the muscle and less targeted to the overall exercise competency. However, here's the real place where this video kicks off with a real point you might not have heard before. And that is, I've been struggling a lot and I can't express my feelings but for going on YouTube and being public with it. So I just wanted to say out loud, I can't believe I'm doing this. I am in love with Scott the Video Guy. It's a romantic love. It's a sexual love. Scott?
I love you too.
Oh, that was nice. He's definitely not kidding.
And I meant it.
Well, if he says he meant it, then he meant it. That's what my psychotherapist says always works. Here's the deal. Here's the big kicker. There is a difference in the goal as you approach any rep of an exercise with strength training versus hypertrophy training. And that goal is twofold. For strength training, the goal is to move weight from point A to point B. For hypertrophy training, that goal is to stimulate the muscle. It sounds very similar, but they're different enough for more advanced folks for it to actually matter. In strength training, you want to use the technique and mentality that lets you lift the most amount of weight. In hypertrophy training, you want to use the technique and the mentality, and I'll get to more about what those are later, that hits the target muscle the hardest. Because remember, in strength training, if you successfully squat 500 pounds, No one at the judges table asks you, did you feel it in your quads? Can you guys imagine that? We have Dylan, the second camera child, with us today. And it's an awkward nickname, but we're working on it. Can you guys imagine, like, if you did a squat and you're like, all right, I got 500. And the judges are like, did you feel it in your quads? You're like, not really. They red light the squat. It's nonsense. It would never work like that. But if you did a lot of squat reps for hypertrophy and someone's like, did you feel it in your quads? You're like, not really. Well, that really is kind of a problem if you're trying to grow your quads, because clearly some muscles are working, but your quads aren't the ones being pushed closest to their limit, and they're not the ones that are going to be growing the most out of that movement. Maybe it's your glutes, maybe it's your adductors, maybe it's your lower back. So here's another thing. The strength training approach, to reflect those points, makes the lift as easy as possible for however much weight you're using. When you're about to bench press for strength, you want each rep to feel as easy as possible. When a powerlifter does a set of 5 with a new PR weight and he racks the weight and he goes, that was easy as his buddies are like, yes, that's success. But imagine in hypertrophy training, finishing a PR of leg press, racking the weight and be like, that was easy as your buddies are going to be like, cool. Why did you leave the machine? Clearly, you should be doing more reps or more load or doing a technique that exposes your target muscles more to tension. This is what you want to say to your hypertrophy training buddies, to your muscle growth buddies, is to finish that set of leg press and be like, dude, my quads are cooked. That's winning at hypertrophy training. Those are different things. And so in size training, the size approach makes the lift as hard as possible for however much weight is used. You have a 20-pound dumbbell in your hands for curls. You're trying to make that dumbbell, in the technique and mentality that you're using it, as hard as possible on your biceps. Completely the opposite approach as for strength training, which is to make it as easy as possible to get from point A to point B and successfully complete the lift. If you mix those two, at some point you're not really sure what you're training for. And for more advanced folks, that can be a bit of a problem, because for strength training, they end up kind of avoiding the muscle growth stimulus. And this doesn't happen often, but if you're trying to train for strength and you're really worried about which muscles are being activated, you are 1000% overthinking the movement, and you have to be athletic and smooth and coordinated instead. So to put this in other words and kind of really unify these concepts, strength training follows the path of least resistance, with all of the muscles helping that could possibly help that lift. On the other hand, size training follows the path of most resistance for the target muscles. And we're not worried about what other muscles are helping, and ideally not a lot of them help. So that target muscle, or muscles, plural if it's 2 at a time, that you're training have to be the ones bearing load, which is exactly the opposite of what you want in strength training. You want to spread the load out on strength training. You want to condense the load in hypertrophy training. That is a big deal for folks that are more advanced. How does this change their technique? How does this actually, where does the rubber hit the road? For strength, you want to pick each technique of your lift to create the smallest individual range of motion at any joint as possible. All of the joints that you're doing, you want them to have the smallest range of motion, and you want to avoid deep stretches at any of your joints. Think about what a conventional deadlift looks like. Which muscle is getting a major stretch in the conventional deadlift? It's not your quads, you're in a half squat position. It's not your adductors, they're not in a deep stretch. It's not your glutes, it's a half squat position. It's not your lower back, because that's pretty straight. It's not even rounded over. There's almost no stretch on your lower back. And so there is no muscle getting a maximum stretch really on the conventional deadlift, which is a really good thing, because muscles put into their maximum stretch are able to generate a lot of tension internally, but the external tension is much lower. And we don't want low external tension, because external tension is the only thing that matters in strength training. So you want to spread the load out as much as possible and keep each muscle to as little range of motion as possible. More muscles, each one operating at their strongest point instead of exposed at their very weakest point, is how you summate enough to do as much weight as possible. The opposite is true in size. The technique in size is to create the largest individual range of motion for the target muscle, and to make sure that you position that muscle in a really deep stretch under load consistently. For example, the stiff-legged deadlift. In the stiff-legged deadlift, the glutes are working plenty, the quads are hardly working at all, the lower back's working not much. What's happening is the hamstrings are isolated. It's like some and some big dude walks up to you and four of your friends at a bar and he's like, hey, you, and everyone turns around. He's like, nope, just you in the red shirt, buddy. I have a problem with you. The rest of you guys are cool. Red shirt guy's like, Jesus Christ. He looks at his friends and his friends like, did you bump into that? Did you say something to that guy? I'm not going to back you up. That guy's huge. And so you're the hamstrings in that example because you're like, shit, fellas, lower back's like, I got to catch an Uber. I got early work tomorrow. Glutes like, it's not my beef, man. I promised, I swore an oath, Jesus Christ, I wasn't going to be fighting in bars anymore. Shit got out of hand from you last year. And you're like, quads is already out the door. You're like, is it really just pretty much all on me? Yep. Put in that super deep stretch. And that's how we hit hamstring. So if you do 3 sets of 8 with regular deadlifts versus 3 sets of 8 with stiff-legged deadlifts, are going to nuke your hamstrings into the atmosphere. But regular deadlifts, everything else kind of gets a little bit fatigued, but your hamstrings are like totally fine, as fatigued as anything else. So we're putting them, one muscle really gets a range of motion and one muscle gets put into a huge stretch position, which is why stiff-legged deadlifts, you're never going to lift as much weight in a stiff-legged deadlift as you will with a conventional deadlift. One is for strength, the other one is for size. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal in context. Now, how do you harness the mind-muscle connection to guide you to the right hypertrophy technique? Because you could say, okay. I know to put the muscle in a large range of motion. That's a target muscle. I know to put it under a deep stretch, and that's good enough already. But I also know that during the lifting process, our bodies are actually, and our nervous systems are optimized to generate as much force as possible, to pick things up as efficiently as possible, which is great because that means humans learn strength training technique pretty fluidly. You teach them how to do the efficient technique that spreads the load to many muscles, and they get it real quick. And they can tell, like, when I'm inefficient, I'm off center, nothing good is happening. But your body tries to come back to that efficient technique with hypertrophy training when you're doing pec flies, for example, and you're really opening up your chest and really opening up your elbows to stretch your chest. As you get more tired, especially as a beginner intermediate, you're going to start to close that angle of your biceps. You're going to start to limit that chest range of motion. You're going to start to close in on yourself because your body's like, shit, I have to survive this exercise and get as many reps as I can. I can't expose myself like this. This is inefficient. But remember, inefficiency in a sense is what we're trying to do in hypertrophy training. So how do we use the mind-muscle connection to do that? Well, with strength training, you want 2 things: good technique overall, which is practiced, spreading the muscles, spreading the load to all the muscles, and monster drive and athleticism. If you're thinking about how your quads feel during squatting for strength, you're thinking about the wrong thing altogether. You need to be thinking good technique and then just pushing as hard as humanly possible. And you're going to know that that is what you're doing when you feel out the path of least resistance. If you're coming out of the bottom of a squat and it feels really hard, but if you push your hips back a little bit and it starts to feel easier, follow the easy technique. The easier the movement feels rep after rep after rep, the more you're winning in strength training because you're being the most efficient and can thus use the most amount of weight and get the biggest PRs. For size, good technique is reinforced by the path of most resistance. So if you're curling in a certain way kind of into your body that feels like it's easier, if you curl more of an arc and out of your body, you're like, oh, this is way harder. Good. You're supposed to make the technique more difficult with hypertrophy training for that target muscle. And there's another way to cheat the system here and really detect if you're doing a good job stimulating the muscle. It is to feel out the max tension in the target muscle. If you curl in a certain way, you're like, yeah, feeling my forearms, my delts a little bit, biceps feel fine. And then you change your technique for the better. You're going to feel this crazy deep tension in your biceps. That is how you know you're winning. For stiff-legged deadlifts and hamstrings, you're going to know when your hamstrings are being hit because at the very bottom stretch, you're going to be like, oh my God, my hamstrings feel like they're going to tear apart. That's what you want. And for higher repetitions in hypertrophy training, the muscle that is burning is the one that is probably getting the most load. So if you're doing lunges in a way that burns out your quads a ton, but your glutes feel okay, you might consider your technique a little bit differently, lean a little bit more forward, keep your hips back and far away from you during lunges, and all of a sudden your glutes start burning more, your quads start burning less, and you know every single rep you're trying to get max tension through that target muscle. You're trying to get the maximum burn at the end of the set for that target muscle, and you're trying to do the exercise in such a way that the technique is more difficult and the target muscle is feeling it at the same time. You don't want to do a technique that's so difficult that the target muscle doesn't feel it anymore, and it's like some internal rotator in your shoulders that's doing all the shit. That's no good. But if you can combine maximum difficulty and maximum target muscle tension and maximum muscle burn at the end of a set, this is a triple checklist you can use to ask yourself, am I really doing good hypertrophy training technique? Yes. And if you have any three of those things and you're doing strength training, you're doing strength training wrong. Strength training means no one muscle ever feels it a ton. It means the path of least resistance is maximum. And to be completely honest, it means you're not even thinking about what muscles are feeling what. You're thinking about real painful childhood memories. If you implement this technique, especially for your size training, in which you are trying to get into the path of most resistance, you're trying to feel that tension of the target muscle, and you're trying to feel the burn towards the end of the set, how is this going to affect your results in the gym? Well, check this out. You can absolutely strength train your way to massive size. People in powerlifting and strongman do it all the time. But that will require you to use heavier loads, because you're optimizing for heavier loads and not optimizing for getting as much hypertrophy out of lighter loads as possible. So you're going to be working a ton with heavy loads and growing a lot, but you could be growing more and using lighter loads instead. These heavier loads over time will add chronic wear and tear and multiply your acute injury risk. So not only after a number of months, your elbow is going to feel a little bit more jello-y, but any one time you do your maximum force production style jam press or skull crusher, you're more likely to risk pulling your tricep or something like that, or pulling your pec. Whereas if you do it hypertrophy optimization style, after weeks and weeks and months, your joints probably feel better, and any one rep is unlikely to injure you as much compared to that optimized strength feel. In addition to that, strength training, because it requires massive psychological activation and neural drive, because it's physically lifting as much weight as possible, it's going to lower your systemic maximum recoverable volume, because every single rep of strength training beats the shit out of you more. There's only so many reps and sets you can do until your body's like, I can't do this shit anymore, especially your nervous system's like, I can't, I don't even want to come in here and do this. Whereas if you do hypertrophy style training, you can literally recover from more reps and more sets, so you can pour more training down that funnel of growth and get more out of it. If you follow that hypertrophy technique and mind-muscle connection, maximum range of motion for the target muscle, deep stretch for the target muscle, maximum tension and burn for that movement path, and making that movement path the most difficult for that target muscle, then you end up reducing chronic wear and tear for the same growth, reducing acute injury risk for the same growth, and you can maximize your recoverable training volume, which means that you get more growth with all of those other bad things being minimized. And you're also, in a bonus way, able to focus on muscles that really you're not connecting with a ton. Because if you're trying to do rear delts and you're like, I don't know, man, stuff's just moving back there. And if you're doing them for strength, like I just got to get the 20s for a set of 8, you're going to get some good rear delt growth. But if you really lens in your mind's eye on that rear delt going through that big arc, tension in the rear delt and a burn in the rear delt, then all of a sudden you might connect with your rear delts better and over time see more growth in a muscle that otherwise was not so great. So not only does hypertrophy specific technique maximize growth overall, it can let you target muscles that otherwise would just kind of be skipped over and not get as much of a stimulus. There's one downside to this type of training. There is a way around it. You could focus so much on the field that you prevent yourself from ever going super, super heavy, and you prevent yourself from making progress because all you're doing is thinking about how this muscle feels, and you're losing track of the idea that you need to be training really hard and progressively so. Some people take this to the extreme. They say make even a lightweight feel heavy, and it's like there's only so much you can trick the body. At some point, it just needs progressive overload to grow. So how do you combine this progression idea with the idea of a really deep focus on the mechanics of the movement that stimulate the muscle the most? Here's how. First, you want to track all of your loads and your reps and your sets. We do have an app for that, the RP Hypertrophy app. Link in the description. I love the app. I use it every day for training. And when I'm not training, I use it anyway. I just scroll through it and type stuff, delete stuff, make some workouts for fun, menus. I don't have any friends. Can you guys tell I don't have any friends? So the app is great for that. Any other app is awesome too. Just make sure you track your shit. Why? Because every week or so, you're going to add 2.5 pounds or so, or 1 rep to each set. Now, you're always going to keep focused on the movement no matter what. So here's the thing. Every single rep, you are focusing on maximizing that range of motion, on hitting that target muscle, on maximizing that tension, and towards the latter reps, maximizing the burn as well. Absolutely. Each rep, 100%. However, each set as you stack these great reps and great reps and great reps on top of each other, keep in mind you have a goal. You look at your RP hypertrophy app and it's 15 reps at 97.5 pounds. It's not 14 reps at 92 pounds just because you felt like it that day. So what's going to happen is when you focus on every rep being awesome, exactly how we discussed, that deep mind muscle focus, and you're doing the right amount of weight and challenging yourself to do a little bit more reps each week or a little bit more weight each week with no rep drop off, you're simultaneously doing the great technique that's going to optimize every rep's hypertrophy stimulus. And at the same time, getting enough reps and sets to continue to challenge yourself so that you don't fall by the wayside. You're just kind of training on vibes. Vibes are amazing to train on as long as you have a hard cutoff, a hard minimum to go, I have to hit this many reps and this many sets. And if you can't do it without sacrificing your technique, the set is over. That's failure. To be honest, if you start a few reps shy of failure and you progress through several weeks of training, you should be able to hit amazing technique, never sacrificing your technique, and also make gains. Those two together are like peanut butter and jelly. They're like condoms and lube. They're like a dating party and no social media to expose your ass. The best combinations in the world. Scott, do we have any other combos that are goated?
I think you nailed it.
Yeah. Here's one last tidbit to kind of tie all this together. Your core guide that you can take in with you for hypertrophy training is follow the deep muscle pain. If I'm doing flies and I have searing, pulling, tightening, radically expansive pain in my pecs with each rep, I'm probably doing the right thing. If I'm PRing on cable flies and my shoulders sort of feel it, but I don't really feel it in my pecs, it's probably not the ideal way. Will it still grow you muscle? Absolutely. Physics is undefeated. You move once, twice, 3 times, you're doing good work. But for maximum stimulus and minimum fatigue, that deep, discomforting, stretching, pulling, and burning pain inside of your target muscle is the guide. So if you're doing a rep of squats and it feels kind of like, my quads are kind of slipping away, do your next rep maybe a little bit slower, push your hips forward at the bottom, really open up your knees. You're going to feel it in your quads and it's going to suck. More of that suck is what you're after because that is where the best growth comes from. At the end of the day, the philosophy here that you want to take with you to grow your training and muscle growth is if you feel more deep tension and more burn in the muscle by moving a certain way, lean in. If you feel it less by moving another way, don't do that. For strength, that's great. For hypertrophy, wherever there is fire, there's you jumping into the fire. But hey, if you were a humanoid hot dog that just wanted to please his overlord masters by cooking himself in the fire, that's exactly what you want to do. And if you want your legs to look like Ronnie Coleman 2003 overcooked hot dog legs, lean in to the deep pain, that deep range of motion of that specific hypertrophy technique. It's going to hurt. But at the end of the day, you'll be jacked. And then finally, you can come up to that one girl at the gym and realize you have no conversational skills at all. You sit at home and make YouTube videos, and your life is arguably meaningless. See you guys next time.